In this lesson, we're looking at adding and subtracting fractions, probably the most challenging skill having to do with fractions. So far, we've looked at fractions, we've reduced them to lowest terms, we've switched them between mixed numbers and improper fractions, we've multiplied and divided them, so now we're going to add and subtract them. We also looked at, in the previous lesson, how we could make fractions have a common denominator. And that is a crucial skill in order to add and subtract fractions. So we're going to look first at a couple of examples. The first one here, we've got 1/7 plus 3/7. If we think about that, we've got 1/7 of a pizza right here, and we've got 3 more sevenths over here. You can see that if we combine them together, that we have 4/7. So notice that the denominator stayed the same, and we just added the two numerators. I just note that when I'm teaching fractions, I'm always talking about pizzas. Sometimes I'm talking about chocolate bars, but either way, I always get hungry when I teach fractions. So let's take a look at the next example here. Example A, 1/12 plus 5/12. If we follow the example above, we know that our answer will still have the denominator of 12, but our numerator now will be 1 plus 5, which is 6. And that brings up another important point, and that is always reduce your answers to lowest terms. The answer isn't considered complete until it's in lowest or simplest terms, okay? So 6 and 12, 6 goes into both of those numbers, so we can reduce it by dividing the numerator and the denominator by 6, so we'll get 1/2. Okay, now let's try the last example here. 5/13 minus 3/13. So we're subtracting here. So just like in adding, the denominator will stay the same, and now we're going to subtract our numerators. So 5 minus 3 gives us 2/13 for our answer. If the denominators are different, we have an extra challenge, but what we're going to do is find the lowest common denominator and then write the equivalent fractions with the lowest common denominator. So in example C, I have 2/15 plus 2/9. My denominators are 15 and 9. And as we've talked about earlier in class, there are different ways to come up with the common denominator. One would be to write the multiples of one of the numbers. 27, 36, 45, and we might at that point say bingo, because we recognize that 15 also goes into 45. So our new denominator will be 45. And we now need to come up with equivalent fractions. So 2/15 will become something over 45. We're multiplying the denominator by 3, so to keep the fraction equal, we'll also multiply the numerator by 3, so we'll have 6/45. The 2/9, 9 times 5 gives us 45, so 2 times 5 gives us 10. Okay, so now we have common denominators, so we can keep the denominator the same and add up our numerators. Let's take a look at the third one here. We're actually adding 3 fractions together here. So again, we need a common denominator for those. So let's just look at the 8 times table. Well, you know what? 4 goes into 8. 4 is a factor of 8. So we can ignore 4 when looking for lowest common denominator, because anything that 8 goes into, 4 will also go into. So we can look at the 8 and the 6. So we can go 8, 16, 24, there's a multiple of 6, so 24 will be our lowest common denominator. I'll just show more steps as I'm solving this one for how we get to that 24. We want 24 in our denominator, That's 8 times 3, right? So we need to multiply the numerator also by 3. And the next fraction is 5/6. 6 times 4 gives us that 24 denominator, so the numerator we're also going to multiply by 4. And our last one is 3/4. 4 times 6 gives us 24. I'm going to erase some of this other work here, just to give myself space. And so our numerator will also multiply by 6. So now we have 3 24ths plus 20 24ths plus 18 24ths. And that is going to give us 23 plus 18, 41 24ths. And to express it as a mixed number, that will be 1 and 17 24ths as our final answer. I'm actually okay with you leaving your final answer as an improper fraction, because improper fractions are often used, are left in that form if there's a chance that they'll be used again for something else, for multiplying or dividing, because in improper fraction we want to be able to do that with. And now we're going to look at a word problem here. Ali had 7/8 gallon of paint in a can, and he used 3/4 of a gallon to paint the kitchen. How much is left in the can? When you have a word problem, we're going to talk about an approach to take to them. One approach is to think about what you have. What information have you been given? One piece of information that we're given is that we're starting out with 7/8 of a gallon. We're using 3/4 of a gallon. And then we need to decide what kind of operation. Oh, and then the next thing to think about is, what are we being asked for? We're being asked for how much is left in the can. And then we have to decide what operation will give us that. And in this case, if we subtract the amount we used from the amount we started with, that's how much we'll have left. So we'll do 7/8 minus 3/4. 4 is a factor of 8, so we can use 8 as our denominator. So we won't change the first fraction, but we'll change the second one. We're multiplying by 2 to get a denominator of 8, so we'll multiply the numerator also by 2. So we have now 7/8 minus 6/8 equals 1/8. One thing that is, you'll notice, and maybe you remember learning this before, when you are given a word problem, you are translating the word into mathematical operations. You're coming up with a numerical answer, and your job is, in part of your job is to communicate your solution. So we communicate the solution back using words. So we would say Ali has 1/8 gallon left. Finished. And just make it a short and sweet sentence that answers the question that was asked. All right, now let's look at mixed numbers. Mixed numbers, we need a little bit more skill with that, because we have the whole number parts and the fraction parts. And it's fairly straightforward when we're adding. We could rewrite this question as 1 plus 3/4 plus 3 plus 1/12. So when we're changing, when all of the operations are addition, it doesn't matter which order we use for the addition. So we could group those whole number parts together. We could say 1 plus 3 plus 3/4 plus 1/12. So when we add those whole number parts together, we have 4. And then we need to look at the fraction part. I see that I have a denominator of 4 and a denominator of 12. 4 is a factor of 12, so I can use 12ths as my denominator, as my lowest common denominator. So the second fraction will stay the same. 4 times 3 is 12, so I'll multiply the numerator by 3 as well, and I'll have 9/12. So now I can combine my fraction parts, which will become 10/12. So my answer is 4 and 10/12. And hopefully you're thinking that's not quite in final format yet, because that fraction can be reduced. The numerator and the denominator are both even, so we can divide by 2. So we'll have 4 and 5/6 as our final answer. Let's see what happens with question G when we try it. You might like to try it on your own, but I will warn you that something interesting is going to happen with this one. If we follow the same method as earlier, we will see that we can translate or take apart the two parts. So we'll add the whole number parts, and then we'll add our fraction parts. So we've got 5/6 plus a half. So the whole number part, 9. Now, 2 is a factor of 6, so we can leave the 5/6 as is. Sorry about that. So we've got plus 5/6 plus, and 1/2 will be 3/6. I'm multiplying numerator and denominator by 3. So I have 9 plus 5 plus 3 gives me 8/6. Now that is an improper fraction. My numerator is larger than the denominator. So let's convert that. So this is 9 plus 1 and 2/6. So really that means I can combine those whole number parts and have 10 and 2/6. 2 and 6 are both even numbers though, so I'm going to divide them both by 2. So I have 10 and 1/3 as my final answer. So lastly, let's subtracting. And again, subtracting works the same way, but there are a couple of cases where it becomes a little bit more challenging. If we look at this first question, I'm using a lot of the same types of fractions so that in this lesson we're not focusing so much on finding the lowest common denominator as we are on just solving the problem and looking at the addition and subtraction part itself. Just put that back in place for a second here. So I've got 10 and 1/3 minus 5 1/4. We could separate out our whole number parts by like this. We could say this is equal to 10 minus 5. And we can consider our fraction parts, 1/3 minus 1/4. 3 and 4 have a common denominator of 12. So we end up with, our whole numbers are subtracted, so we have 5 plus 1/3 will be 4/12 minus 1/4, which will be 3/12. So I have 5 plus 1/12, or written properly would be 5 and 1/12. Okay, so you can subtract the whole number part, subtract the fraction part. Take a look at what happens in this next example though, because it throws a little bit of a loop on here. So we'll just get rid of our blue balloon here. You might need to borrow one of the whole numbers. If you think about 1/3 minus 5/9, 1/3 is less than 5/9. So I'm not going to be able to subtract the fraction parts as they are. So let's take a look at this one. I've got 10 minus 4. There's the whole number parts. Okay. And I have 1/3 minus 5/9. 3 is a factor of 9, so we'll use 9 as our denominator. So I now have 6 plus, and I'm just separating those with brackets to keep the fraction parts separate from the whole number parts. So I have 3/9 minus 5/9. Well, 3 minus 5 gives me a negative number, and we aren't really dealing with that. So we're going to take one of these whole numbers and split it up into ninths. You could think of it as this as being, I've got 6 whole pizzas and 3 slices that are ninths, but I need to give away 5 of those ninths. So I can give away the 3 loose ones, but I need to cut one of those whole pizzas up into 9 slices. Okay, so if I do that, I end up now with 5 plus, and now I'm going to take that whole slice and put it here. Sorry, that whole pizza. Now I've got 1 3/9. Let's convert that to an improper fraction. So I have 5 plus, that'll be 9 3, 12/9 minus 5/9. So now I can do my subtraction. 12 minus 5 gives me 7/9. So I have 5 7/9 as my final answer. Okay? You don't have to separate your whole numbers from your fractions, but this is a way that many students find helpful. I'll just show a different way of writing this question down over here. Oops. Let me just make that level again. I've got 10 1/3, and I'm subtracting 4 5/9. So I can see that, well, first I need to make my fractions be common denominators. So I've got 10 3/9 minus 4 5/9. I can see that 3/9 is smaller than 5/9, so I need to borrow one of these 10. So I'm going to have 9, and that one is going to become 9. So I'm going to have 9 12/9 minus 4 5/9. 12 minus 5 gives me 7/9, and 9 minus 4 gives me 5. Okay, so some of you may find that's just a little bit more straightforward than separating out the whole number portions. And that's the end of this lesson.